Willow Creek Springs presents Healthy Living with your host, Joe Grumbine.
Well, hello and welcome to the Healthy Living Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Grumbine, and I'm happy to share some thoughts with you guys today. I'm super grateful for everybody who's supported this podcast, and as we continue to grow, I'm looking forward to not only sharing more and interesting topics, but more and interesting guests. If you're interested in participating as a guest, please reach out. You can generally leave a message through the show notes, or my email is grumbinejoe@gmail.com. And, you know, you don't have to be an expert. You can come on and share your experience. If you are an expert, we love to hear about ideas, techniques, products, anything that ties us to a healthier life, mind, body, spirit, and any combination of the above. And today, I'm a little off topic in some ways, because usually I'm talking about something specifically related to a particular health concept. This is a more general topic, but I think it's important. In going through life, you meet a lot of different people, and our social life, our relationships are critical in our health. And we've talked about that numerous times, community and all of that. And I think it's important to focus some attention on those things. And this also relates to just accomplishing things, to setting um, tasks in motion, all sorts of elements that can be applied to health. And so today, I want to talk about the differences and maybe the strengths and weaknesses between the type of person who is a planner, super hyper focused on planning everything to the T, and then the counterpoint to that, which is the spontaneous one. And I think that there are benefits to both sides that can dramatically affect our growth and our health and our ability to learn, and it can affect mind, body, and spirit if you really start looking at it. And I think a lot of the things that we talk about have to do with learning and accomplishing, goal setting, and achieving things. I think that's where health ultimately comes in. So if you're lackluster and you're not trying to do good or better with your life, chances are you won't. And you'll probably sit relatively stagnant. You'll probably find yourself in habits and ruts, and maybe good ones, maybe not. But I think the not good ones tend to be a lot easier to fall into than the better ones. So first, I want to talk about the hyper planner and the strengths and weaknesses that can come from that, and maybe to look at yourself and see where do you fit into this. I know I am a somewhat planner, and I like to think that there's a balance between the two that would be the better way to be. Um, but there's extremes on all sides, and some people, are far to one side of a spectrum. So let's look at some positives about, being a planner. And maybe the first one would be, you have some clarity and direction. You think about things, you plan, meaning you actually think about what you want. I think that that's critical in a healthy life, because if you don't know what you want, how are you going to know if you get it? Happiness is highly connected to health, and happiness is a choice, I think, more than anything. But it has to do with being aware, being mindful, being in a place where you know where you fit, in a place that you create, but you also exist within. So clarity and direction, I think, are important because you have some sense of where you're going, you know where you are, and maybe you even know how you're going to get there. Um, and goal setting, I think a planner definitely has an advantage. Um, you know, if you say, I'm here and I want to get there, that's my goal, and you're thinking about it and you're a planner, well, you're going to go, well, what can I do to get from here to there better, faster, more stable? And I think that your planning can really create a path to get to where you're going. And I think planning creates a structured approach. So if you think about it, if you're a planner, you're thinking about the beginning, the middle, and the end of your goal or your task or your idea, whatever it is you're working on. And the chances are, if you create a plan, it's going to have some kind of a structure to it. It's going to make sense. It's going to say, well, I'm going to start here. I'm going to build this foundational element, and then I'm going to stand on top of that, and then I'm going to be able to reach over to this other place or create this dynamic or this relationship or build this tool, whatever it is. But there's going to be a structure to it. So you can sort of, number one, you can look ahead and plan your next moves better. I think that there's a huge advantage in that. I think that a lot of people just sort of fake their way through life and they just react, always reacting. And sometimes being proactive, I think, and many times being proactive far outweighs being reactive because you get to have more choices. When you're being reactive, well, you have more good choices anyways. When you're being reactive, there's generally a lot fewer options to get to where you want to go because you're reacting to a situation rather than saying, well, I want to get here, so I'm going to make the first move. So I think that's good. Um, I think you really, when you're a planner, you improve your productivity. I think you generally uh, consider time management. I think if you're not a planner, I think you inadvertently piss a lot of time away. I think we lose sight of what we're doing when where we spend our time. I think today with these little square boxes that everybody spends their time on scrolling and YouTubing and all the stuff that we do. I mean, hopefully listening to an interesting podcast is a good use of your time. Reading a book or writing a book or writing poetry or music or whatever it is you're doing. But I think when you're working from a plan, somehow you think about time more. And again, is that always better? I don't know. We're looking at this right now. Not necessarily going to come to conclusions, but just examine the situation. I think you waste less time and energy and efforts by having a plan because a lot of times, excuse me, if you don't have a plan, a lot of times you'll inadvertently say or do the same thing over again, or you'll forget a thing that you needed to do, and then you got to go back and undo a step. And if you're looking at your plan and you're looking at it on paper in your mind, on a computer screen, however you're doing it, I think it allows you to see pitfalls and where waste would happen a lot easier rather than just jumping into it. So I think there's definitely a benefit there. I think being proactive as a planner, um, you have a benefit because, or an advantage because I think you can anticipate your challenges ahead of time. You're going to see where's the obstacles, where's the difficult spot going to come. How am I going to prepare for that? Do I need to train? Do I need to save? Do I need to dig a hole or build a fence or whatever it is that is going to help you overcome this challenge? But you're going to see the challenge ahead of time. And I think also you look at risks. and maybe come up with the plan B, maybe come up with ways around potential risks. And I think that's an advantage to just cruising down the road, not knowing what's around the corner, and hoping you're ready for it. I think the planner has a confidence that you get from your plan. You are prepared, you're thought out, you can walk through life going, okay, I'm ready for this. There's an advantage, I think, to that. I think that's a strength. Um, and I think that like in a situation like with my nonprofit, as I'm articulating our plan, I think it gives you um, I don't know, like a stakeholder assurance where you can say, hey, here's my vision, here's my plan, here's what I'm going to do. And you can see it and look through my eyes and maybe feel confident in what I'm looking to do. And I think a final point to this might be uh, the plan is going to bring better team collaboration. So, if you got a guy who's motivated and spontaneous, yeah, you can get people together. But if this person doesn't execute well, or maybe he's fun and full of charisma, but you know, causes people to have issues every now and again, it's going to be a lot harder to get a team together to say, all right, let's work together, let's collaborate on this. So I think the planner is going to have clear roles and responsibilities. I think that builds a better team. I know I struggle with that a little bit because I'm all about freedom and I want to sort of bubble up people's potentials, and I don't always see what they want to do. So I like to give people the opportunity, but in a lot of ways, people would rather be led with these clear roles and responsibilities so they know what they're getting into and they don't have to think about it. And then maybe finally, alignment and accountability. So people know where you fit into this plan. If there's timelines involved, if you're on point or if you're behind the ball. There's accountability. And I think really you can accomplish more with a group this way. Now let's look at some negatives to the planner. I think a lot of times planners get stuck in their plan and you can get overwhelmed and stressed and get seized up, you know. Um, Sometimes when you plan, you just plan down to these microscopic levels that maybe you don't need to, Sometimes when you overthink it, you don't act. And another piece is you can get overwhelmed, um, when you have too many details, too many things to pay attention to, too many things to remember, and it can be very overwhelming if you're looking at it. I think in some ways you can sort of look at it as to, am I looking through a microscope or am I looking through a telescope or am I just looking through my eyes? And the difference of perspective that you get from this. So if you start looking at a microscope, you start seeing all the little teeny holes and bits and pieces and bugs and creatures and all the things. And oh my God, it's a lot. And if you look through a telescope, you can see so far that you can see so many things. You realize how huge everything is. It can also be overwhelming. Sometimes just looking through your own eyes and seeing what you can see can be not so overwhelming. I think when you're a hardcore planner, a lot of times you're inflexible. So, we'd like to think we can plan ahead and plan for everything, but the truth is you don't always see what's coming. Sometimes you can have the greatest plan and something will change that will throw everything out of whack. And, you know, you can create undue stress. You can limit your options and opportunities. You can cut out, um, the possibility for you to pivot when you need to because you're stuck in a plan. And I think sometimes that can get in your way. I think one of the biggest problems with the planners is what they call analysis paralysis. I think they just spend I guess it would be they. I'm not so much of a hardcore planner. I'm a somewhat planner. Um, but I can remember working on when I set up my nonprofit, the Human Solution International, and when we were originally setting the thing up, I needed to get it set up because I was getting ready to go to a court battle with the government over me providing cannabis medicine to people, and I was facing prison time over this. And we built this group that was gonna offer support to people going through similar cases. And I had all these wonderful people that came from different groups and different backgrounds, and we all agreed to create this entity, this nonprofit. But I had one or two people that were just so stuck on planning and they wanted to fine tune everything, get those bylaws perfect, get all the little things. And finally, I was like, no, we got to go. We got to file this thing and we got to start and we'll figure out on the way. And I'm so glad I did because I don't think we ever would have launched the thing. And both of the people involved ended up not performing and fell off the fell off the track early on. So I think inaction is a big deal. I think also, as we discussed a little bit, missed opportunities. I think when you plan so much, there's opportunities that come up. Not only do you maybe limit choices to get away from a problem, but also to move yourself to an opportunity and take advantage of a situation that happens briefly. And I think that's definitely a downside of being a planner. I think again, this is a little bit rehashing it, but neglecting execution, planning versus doing. Um, I think a lot of times having the meeting is important, maybe the first time around, but sometimes you go and do the thing and then you have the meeting instead of have the meeting and then maybe do the thing. And I think that's important. I think talking about things is generally not doing them. And I think it's important to talk about a thing if you're going to do it to a point, especially if you're going to be doing it with other people, if you're part of a team. But talking about it and talking about it and talking about it generally is not doing it. And then I think in a lot of ways, you can get delayed results. You spend so much time planning. And again, it might work for you. Your plan might get you there quicker. But I think sometimes it goes the other direction. I think you spend so much time planning things that you're spending a lot of the time that you would be doing thinking about and talking about and planning what you're going to do. Um, Another negative side, again, is inflexibility. I think that, you get stuck in this rigid structure, this plan that says, I got to do this or it's not going to work, or I won't do it unless I can do it this way. And I think that, again, the inability to adapt does far more harm than good, is the way I see it. I think sometimes planners also have a fear of failure. I think that, you know, you set in your mind an expectation. Excuse me. Um, you set in your mind how it's going to go, and you're anticipating things, and you've got it all laid out. You've got it all planned out. And sometimes, even when a little thing goes wrong, I think sometimes you can really freak out and have this fear of failure. And I think maybe finally, it can over planning can strain relationships. I think that if you insist on your plan, your way, or the highway, it puts friction into a collaboration. I think it can create a an environment that makes it difficult to work together and strategize. And I think ultimately, um, an overly detailed plan can complicate communication because if you are the person who developed the plan, you create the plan, you put it out there, and you just think that everybody's going to read it, listen, follow, and if they don't, they're not doing it right. And there's really not a lot of room to discuss a plan once everybody is on board with the plan, because if you're not going to change it, then what is there to discuss? And so I think overall, being a planner has a lot of benefits, but I think that taking it too far, and I think that not being flexible is really the thing that gets most in your way by being a planner. So I think that that's kind of it can be applied to anything. It can be applied to a diet. It can be applied to health goals, meaning fitness goals. All of these things that we talk about, like what I've been dealing with, solving the cancer problem. I've done a lot of research, but the truth is you got to act, you got to do things, you got to take risks, you got to get out there and, um, put things to the test. So I think that that's definitely there are strengths and weaknesses to being an extra planner. The other counterpoint to that, the opposite side of that coin, is being spontaneous. And the spontaneous person is exciting and fun. And hi, this is Joe Grumbine, and I wanted to share an update. The platform that hosts this podcast has made some changes to the subscriber settings, and we have a number of subscriber-only episodes that we offer to the supporters, and for a minimum of $3 a month, we can get you signed up. And if you're already signed up and you're having some kind of trouble locating these episodes in the other platforms, I would say maybe the best answer is to unsubscribe and then resubscribe. I'm sorry for the hassle. I don't have any way to make a change, but I'm very grateful for all the support. Thank you. Brings with them endless opportunities, because you just never know what they're going to do. But there's also a lot of challenges that comes with this. And I know that I've been very spontaneous in my life, and it's brought me plenty of good things, but it's also got me in a lot of trouble. And so let's first look at the positives that would be involved with being spontaneous. So, spontaneous person is generally very flexible. You're ready for whatever comes your way because you don't know what's going to come your way and you don't really have a plan. And so you say, well, I'm going to get up and see what happens. And so you're adaptable. You're open to opportunities. You're out there looking for opportunities. I think that's very positive. I think that a lot of times the person who doesn't plan but is aware and maybe just knows what they want can have an advantage in a lot of situations. I think creativity really relies on spontaneity. I think that if you're creative, you have to be able to improvise. You have to be able to flow. You have to be able to, you know, I don't think a painter or a sculptor or a musician necessarily goes, I'm going to write this song and it's going to be this way, and I'm going to structure this thing and I'm going to do it. Maybe you can. And I'm sure probably some people do. But I think generally, when we're being artistic and creative, we flow. We just let it happen and open up that element that allows possibly divine revelation, or our inner self, or connecting with whatever energy that we seek to. I think you can only do that if you're open to it, and there's a spontaneity that's required for that. I think that spontaneous thinking, I think it fosters innovation, because instead of being stuck in a plan, and again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you're able to entertain the notion of things that might not be possible. And sometimes you can explore and discover something new because you're not living within the bounds of a plan or structure. Sometimes you can have um, a fresh perspective. You jump in and try something new that you've never done before. I think it can be inspirational. You can just, let's try this, and jump in and try it, and not being afraid to fail. I think spontaneity is fun and exciting. I think it's really brings out the juice of life. I think that, when you think about what what makes life enjoyable, worth living, I think spontaneity is a big part of that. And I think without some element of spontaneity, life can become rigid and boring, or difficult. And I think there's a joy that comes from spontaneity, that only comes from spontaneity. There's a thrill. There's I think you can create some beautiful memories through spontaneity. I think spontaneity is energizing. I think when you go out on an adventure, or if you're with somebody, especially I think if you're with somebody who's spontaneous, I think it raises your energy level dramatically. I think it increases a connection with people because you're present. If you're spontaneous, you got to be watching where you're going, because you don't know where you're going. And I think that you can create better bonds, you can create trust, you can um, deepen your connections with a spontaneous relationship. I think trust is really important, and an adventurous spirit requires trust. If you're going to come on, let's go over this way. We're riding horses, or we're riding motorcycles, or we're running or riding bikes or whatever, and you're saying, come follow me. I have to trust you pretty blindly to say, all right, let's go, and just know that it's going to be okay. And there's not really a place for a plan in all of that. And I think the spontaneous person has an opportunity for um, really moving forward with personal growth, because when you're doing things new, going outside of your comfort zone, going outside of your norm, you learn about yourself. You find out what you're made of. You find out what you're capable of. Getting out of comfort zones, I think, is a huge, important part of growth. And you can plan that. But I think a lot of times when you just make a decision, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to do that thing that I can't do, and I'm going to do it anyways. Um, and I think a lot of spontaneity is, I think, about being willing to fail and get back up and do it again. And I think I've talked about this before, but I think the idea of failing forward is powerful. I think that being willing to fall on your face and get back up again, and learn a little something from it, and just keep going. I think spontaneity is definitely an asset for that. Now let's look at the downside of the spontaneous side, though. Spontaneous people are generally disorganized. They can't find things. Chaos. And there's generally the bohemian spontaneous, fun person has got a lot of problems and chaos. And, there's a downside of not having any kind of structure if you want to have any kind of professional experience in your life. And a lot of time you get unforeseen consequences because you didn't plan for it. You didn't figure it out. You didn't pay attention. You didn't pay the bill. The lights got turned off. You didn't pay the ticket. You got a warrant. You didn't. You weren't paying attention to where you were going, and you ran out of gas. Whatever. There's all kinds of unforeseen consequences that come by being spontaneous, especially if you're not prepared and aware. I think spontaneous people tend to be impulsive, and I think they tend to be making more risky decisions. Now, there's a benefit to that in some ways, especially if the risk reward equation, generally there's more reward to more risk. And if you're good at being spontaneous, you can capitalize on that. But I think a lot of times, you miss one big one and it can cripple you. And financially, especially, a lot of spontaneous activities can just be very expensive because you didn't think of it through. I think inconsistency is a problem with being spontaneous because I think it can put a strain on a relationship after the fun wears off a little bit. It's fun for a while, but after a while you get burned out. You only have so much emotional equity to spend on being spontaneous. There's a part of a relationship that requires um, predictability and confidence and consistency. And I don't think that spontaneousness lends itself to predictability. So I think it can make somebody be unreliable. And that puts a strain on relationships. I think a lot of times spontaneous people are also storytellers, and they're willing to stretch things a little bit. And I think that can put a strain on a relationship. Um, I think sometimes you miss an opportunity because you're being so spontaneous to reflect on your progress, on your action, on your plan. I think sometimes you rush decisions, you overlook details because you're so busy being reactive, and the planner may overdo thinking everything out, but I think the spontaneous one oftentimes misses things. I think you overlook details sometimes that can lead to mistakes or oversights or missed opportunities. And then, of course, I think you get additional stress because the spontaneous person can oftentimes get themselves into a lot of jams and have conflicts with relationships. And, a lot of times unexpected things don't go the way you want. A lot of times they do, and it's fun, but sometimes they don't, and it can be very stressful. So I think that both sides have their benefit and their detriment. And I think the key to a healthy uh, strategy for approaching life this way is to be capable of making plans. I think to be mindful of a plan, but to have a willingness to be spontaneous when the time is right. I think is going to give you uh, the best approach to be able to make the best of both things. And I think that's where wisdom comes in. That's where discernment comes in, is figuring out, is this one better for me to create a plan and a structure, or is it let's see what happens. And I think the well balanced, healthy person is going to have a combination of both of these. So, anyways, those are my thoughts on the subject. I hope you find it interesting, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you for supporting the Healthy Living Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Grumbine, and we'll see you next time. This has been another episode of the Healthy Living Podcast. We produce this show so that people can share their stories, people that have overcome obstacles, people that are undergoing obstacles. We're building a community of health-minded individuals. If you're interested in supporting the show, please leave a review on the platform you're listening to it on. If you're interested in becoming a guest, please send an email to itsjoegrumbine@gmail.com, or you can send a note into the notes section of the podcast. All right. Well, thank you for supporting this show, and we hope you've enjoyed it.